So from 1.6% in the late 70s to 2.1% just last year. And that, of course, is going to be a very important number to keep track of. I think we saw in the first quarter that annualized GDP was down maybe 4.5%, 5%. I've seen projections anything from -2 to -10% on GDP overall for 2020. So philanthropy is a lagging indicator. Does that mean as a sector, we could be down 2 to 10%? And what does that come out to? That could be $10 to $50 billion. On the other hand, maybe this is truly a unique moment, an extraordinary moment where more people will participate in the philanthropic marketplace, maybe more diversified forms and sources of giving. And that maybe that those contributions will help raise commitments overall as we see play out in the market. The last thing we would just take a look at, and then that's a wrap for 2019. We're going to kind of pivot and go forward. Was that brief enough, Charlie? Right? We just kind of want the headlines here. But on total giving as it relates to the stock market, it is a factor. There's no doubt about it. It just doesn't correlate as much. So while the S&P last year was up pretty significantly at almost 27%, giving, and this is inflation adjusted, was up just about 2.5%. There's probably a lot more information we could share and other data bits that we can extract from what happened last year. But I think we want to pause for just a second. And then, Laura, I would ask you to maybe lead us through a quick discussion on what factors might affect giving in 2020 and what are some of the trends we're seeing real time in Q1 of 2020 and some of our climate surveys. But we'd encourage everybody at this point, maybe you could just comment, whether it's a word or a sentence or two. Is there anything that surprised you about 2019 results? And we'll just create a pause. And at that point, Laura, it's still a convenient way to transition to your part of the presentation. And feel free, everyone, to record your responses. And we'll circle back to that later in our discussion.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate it. 2019, it was a great year for fundraising, and here we are in 2020. And I think that we can all agree that we have never seen a time like this in modern fundraising history. We know that there will be a different story to report on 2020. Of course, none of us on the line today has a crystal ball and can predict what that will look like, but we do know some of the factors that are going to play into what 2020 ultimately looks like. There has been a confluence of a number of different things that are going to impact philanthropy, from a global pandemic to market uncertainty to a push for social change, unlike what we have seen since Giving USA started tracking these numbers in the 70s.
Hey, Laura, and 2020 is only half over.
And it's only half over. That's right. We've got murder hornets, I understand, that are going to be part of this. I know there's some people who are doing bets on zombies is next, so we'll see. But hopefully, what we'll see in the balance of this year is something of an amazing turnaround that we can all look back on with a remarkable way in the future here. So let's take a quick look at what has transpired so far in 2020. We want to look at a couple of the numbers from the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, which is managed by AFP. They released some giving data for Q1 last week. And what they noted was that between January and March, there was a decline in individual giving of 6%. There was an uptick in small dollar donations. There's some speculation that might be driven by the tax changes that have been put into effect for 2020. But that was really offset by a decrease in mid-level and large gifts. On a positive note, the FEP reported that January and February were really good months. So this downturn is indicative mostly of March. And that even as we got to the tail end of March, they were seeing the beginnings of a rebound. And so we'll have to take a close look at what Q2 looks like when those numbers become available. I know that all of us are really anxiously awaiting those numbers, and that will include the full weight of initiatives like Giving Tuesday Now, which wouldn't be in those Q2 numbers, for low and mid-level gifts. For the mega gifts, if we think about some of those that have been brought into the philanthropic sphere in the last few weeks and months, those wouldn't be included. I'm thinking of some of these 9-figure gifts that have been made in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and in the wake of nationwide protests. And lastly, we do know that there's been a pretty substantial uptick in disbursements from DAFs over the past few months. So stay tuned for Q2. We'll see what happens. But we're hopeful that we'll see that increase. Should the declines continue, we know that we'll see a pretty big impact, but even the study authors on that FEP project noted that there was some skepticism that downturn would continue through the rest of 2021. Looking at some reasons to be hopeful, you all have given us some great information on some of the green shoots that are happening inside of philanthropy. CCS undertook 2 recent surveys, one that closed at the beginning of May, a second that closed at the beginning of June, and received responses, over 1,000 responses from nonprofit organizations across sectors, across the country, that focused in on what you're seeing in terms of fundraising. Just a couple of notes from those surveys. A quarter of nonprofits reported fundraising increases, while the number reporting decreases, if you look at the change from May to June, actually declined. And that's in keeping with other industry reports and surveys, notably AFP's May survey that went out to organizations involved with AFP. On the other side, when donors are polled, the results are pretty mixed. Some surveys have demonstrated a majority maintaining their giving, and others have reported nearly half of donors planning to give less or have given less in the last month, with about a third of them saying that they have given less this year as compared to last year. Just looking now at overall fundraising through the end of the year. Again, this is from our Philanthropic Climate Survey, which is you reporting back to us what you're seeing. Majority of the organizations polled still predict that they will experience a decline in fundraising, but the number who are and the severity of that impact has somewhat lessened, according to the respondents. Looking at unrestricted dollars, as many organizations have seen increases in restricted dollars as have seen decreases. And this may be where some of that DAF money is coming into play, because we've seen firms such as Fidelity Charitable reporting back to us that many of the disbursements that they're making are unrestricted or are going to organizations to be directed to where most needed. So we are seeing some interesting impact there. And again, that'll be a trend line to watch over the next few months. Just looking at campaigns that are underway, nonprofits continue to report that they plan to stay the course for campaign activity. Of course, we do recommend that if you have a campaign underway, that you think real carefully before canceling. We only had 1% of our respondents say that they were canceling outright. Some are pausing, of course, to rethink what strategies they need to put in place in order to continue any transformational efforts that they had underway. But this is in keeping with what we've, the knowledge that we've gained through past global crises, that those who continue to hustle, continue to raise the funds, and ultimately emerge on the backside of these types of experiences stronger. So with that, we'd love to hear a little bit from you on the line today about your fundraising. Would love to hear what has been the impact that you've experienced so far. And so if you wouldn't mind typing a quick response in the chat box, we'll all take a look and see where this group is sitting in terms of your own fundraising. While we're doing that, I can hand it over to Adam. Adam's going to talk to us a little bit about moving forward. So we just threw a whole bunch of stats at you from 2019 and 2020. So the question is, what do we do with all that information, and what are some smart practices to put into place now? And after that, we'll open this up to questions from the group.
Thanks, Laura. And I encourage everyone to continue to put their thoughts into the chat box from the questions that were posed, and we'll definitely reflect upon those and have plenty of time to discuss. But as Laura kind of teed up, we've looked at a lot of data now. So what's next? And we wanted to make sure to take a moment to talk through some emerging trends that funders themselves, particularly at the biggest levels, are shifting their thinking as it relates to making contributions, both nationally and also here in Houston. And we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, and we're still seeing now, that foundations and corporations in particular are often removing some of the restrictions that are placed on organizations receiving those grant funds. And whether that includes relaxing grant requirements and restrictions, making grants more quickly, and providing flexible capital for discretionary use that Laura referenced related to unrestricted funding. We're also seeing giving from charitable funds that are distributed at a higher and faster rate. And particularly, again, foundations and also donor advised funds. Laura mentioned Fidelity Charitable, and what we saw as of late May, that giving from Fidelity Charitable in particular, it was up 30% so far this year. And that has been something that we've seen across a lot of the big donor advised funds and institutional donor advised funds. So Vanguard Charitable, Schwab Charitable, they both said increased giving came out of their donor advised fund. I think it was 50% over the similar time frame. And Goldman Sachs Philanthropy Fund said grants rose 26% in the first 5 months of the year and almost 70% in April alone, which is very encouraging and wonderful to see. We're also seeing that organizations, both corporate and nonprofit, are really partnering and working together to make things happen more quickly and more efficiently. And we're seeing this approach take shape here in Houston, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail. And people are giving to support the communities in which they live and to partners who have expertise in the communities they serve. That is nothing new in and of itself. Giving has always been primarily local, but we're seeing kind of a double down effect for that right now. And whether that's community foundations or partnerships or community impact organizations like many of you on this call, and would love to hear your own perspectives on this. We're also seeing philanthropy is helping to shape the public sector, whether that's through public-private partnerships or just the public sector on its own. But capital is being provided to fund government programs and help shape policy and advocacy, really, particularly in ways that we're seeing now with, of course, the public health crisis, but also with racial injustice matters that are affecting the country and globally. If we take a look at, I guess, the next slide, there are a handful of other trends that we're seeing as well. And again, this is the national perspective, but we're going to zoom down into Houston as well. But we're seeing that foundations are doing things a little bit differently, even to the extent that they're issuing debt so that they can make an even greater impact on their communities by freeing up more capital to support grants. So in this example, we've got the Ford Foundation. They borrowed $1 billion to make more distributions available. And then the other four, the Mellon Foundation, Kellogg, MacArthur, Doris Duke, combined for another $725 million in debt financing to allow for philanthropic distributions. We're also seeing individuals get into the act as well. It's not just the foundations and corporations and donor advised funds. At some of the biggest levels, we're seeing mega gifts being made really quickly and openly. Jack Dorsey from Twitter, many of you may have come across this news, but it's giving away hundreds of millions of dollars without the typical process or bureaucracy. Instead, his gifts are going to be disclosed in real time and on a public spreadsheet, which is in a way unprecedented during an unprecedented time. And technology born out of necessity really during the pandemic. And, this is a perfect example of it, what we're all doing right now. These are convenings that we like to have in person. I know you all do the same, but it's really begun to shape future funding needs and revenue sources for organizations. So whether you're a healthcare organization or in higher ed, independent schools, you're looking at telehealth for hospitals, distance learning for education. And we're seeing that philanthropic investments in these areas are being sought and actually attained for long-term infrastructure, not just short-term immediate needs. So people and organizations are starting to look at what's going to be needed and available in the future and what's sustainable even after social distancing ultimately subsides. So there's a lot of trends there, and we wanted to kind of just take a quick pause. And these are timeless principles for fundraising that CCS prepared and widely shared back in March. Some of you may have seen these already. And these are really based on what we observed successful organizations do during other extraordinary circumstances, whether that's the last recession or terrorist attacks, natural disasters. But while these are really intuitive, such as just increase your communication and consider leveraging technology and showing empathy, and maybe these even seem elementary at this point, 90 plus days later, they're still really important to remember and continue to talk through and think through today, because they're the basic building blocks that you need to fundraising activity and really your philanthropic output during these challenging times. So focusing a little bit more onto Houston and your own philanthropic response to these times, it's interesting because they mimic and parallel some of those national trends that we've been seeing. So even though those are from a national perspective, we're seeing the same thing happen right here in Houston. So these are just a couple of examples, but the Greater Houston Recovery Fund and the Harris County Relief Fund, I'm sure many of you on this call are aware of these, are prime examples of collaboration and partnership, the same types that we're seeing across the country between Houston nonprofit leadership organizations. And collectively, over $45 million has been raised and made available to serve your own community here in Houston. And we're also seeing on the next slide that Houston area nonprofits are really utilizing our infrastructure and expertise to assist government relief efforts, one of those other kind of emerging trends we talked about. And here are examples of grants being provided quickly and with great flexibility in an oftentimes unrestricted manner to support those in need, whether it's for childcare, food, rent, healthcare needs, whatever it might be. And a quick special shout out to the Houston Food Bank. I think there may be some members of that organization on the call here who joined some of our CCS colleagues on a virtual webinar recently about donor retention during a crisis, and had a lot of great experience to share from your recent flooding and hurricanes and natural disasters. And then, of course, Feeding America, one of our cherished client partners, of which the Houston Food Bank is a member organization. And we've seen on the next slide, there are countless examples of the tremendous support and leadership shown by the Houston community to support these efforts, whether that's cash gifts, meals, PPE, other in-kind gifts. In this slide, I'm not going to go through these in detail, but really just highlights examples of the tremendous generosity from Houston's foundations, corporations, and individuals, of course, to help all of you and help the community. And while all of the giving is noteworthy, the energy sector's continued investment, despite a continued and significant downturn in the market, we recognize the oil and gas industry plays such a large role in Houston. It's a sign of the value that corporate partnerships and engagement can bring to nonprofit partners. So there is evidence of these ultimately nationally philanthropic trends taking place right here in Houston through those collaborative approaches, support for public efforts through partnership with the government, and more flexible and real-time disbursements of money to grantees. So while I've been talking, I've seen the chat box just lighting up nonstop. I hope that's a good sign of some comments and thoughts and not a stop talking Adam chat function. But well, I guess I'll turn it back over to some of my colleagues, because I think we're at the time exactly on schedule to really open it up for discussion, and maybe we can start talking through some of the things that you all are seeing and thinking and wanting to explore in more detail.
Adam, you'll notice there are 37 comments. Adam, stop. No, of course not. I think
I broke my last record of 32. That's great.
That's right. Record breaking in Texas. No, it's look, this is great conversation overall. There have been a lot of comments and questions in the chat function. I think we want to give people an opportunity as well to kind of animate some of the discussion thread. If you want to unmute and maybe contextualize a comment or a question a little bit further. I'm sure my CCS colleagues have been observing a number of things. I've noted some commentary around individual giving trends and factors, events, and moving events to a virtual setting and what the results have been there. Discussion around unrestricted giving or maybe relaxed constraints. And Charlie, you had some great language around that about purposeful or specific, but still less constrained. And then almost being COVID relevant and funded and benefiting in ways that's really mission critical. But would be delighted to hear from some of the groups. So if you had a comment in the chat, if you would like to share that with the full group, or if you had a question, let's all connect with each other as resources and colleagues. Just give it a moment there if anybody does want to unmute and reflect on any of the comments in the chat function or anything else that's been discussed so far. We can keep talking, but we would love to hear from you all as well. Looks like Amelia just asked a question as well about hiring freezes or positions and recovery.
Hey, Greg, I think this varies obviously significantly market to market, but my sense is we haven't seen the layoffs in the not-for-profit sector that I think we will. I was on a call this morning with Cathedral, and they were talking about like the need to really raise money so that they can maintain their staff. And that was very different messaging from what they've been saying over the last like 3 months. And so I think it's getting very real for organizations, which is like a good position for philanthropy, because philanthropy can come in and help make a really tough situation more stable, better. It can help organizations through this time. I think you just have to be very candid about where you're at as an organization. And often there's a reluctance to do that because you don't want to come across as sort of weak or needy as an organization. And that's not what I'm saying at all. But if you're really purposeful, it's like we need these funds now to keep our staff and our best people active because the needs are just so much greater in the community. I think that's something philanthropists will fund.
Yeah, it's great advice too, Charlie. I mean, about being clear and candid and confident in just the purpose and momentum
Totally.
of your nonprofit, that we're fulfilling a critical role in society here, and this is how we've been impacted, and this is also why this could be a wise return, so to speak, on your philanthropic investment at this time. I was also intrigued and delighted, Kelly. I don't know if you're still on the call or
Yeah, I'm here.
with your audio, but you even commented on events and just right. Was there almost like either with a thanks or and also with an applaud of the events that have been transitioned or converted? That, yeah, one point on that, and then another one I'd love to hear you talk more about of just giving and the nature of that, whether it's restricted or unrestricted or relaxed. I thought those were great observations and insights.
Yeah, I think this kind of all ties together. So my family, so I speak from the donor's perspective, but my family has been giving a lot more unrestricted gifts. But I think that probably better said is the way Charlie put it, which is that we're just trying to be more responsible with the restrictions that we do put on the gifts, because we're appreciating the transparency from the organizations that we usually give to. And it would be way worse for us to know that they can't be here next year continuing to do the work that they're doing if they don't ask for us to help them keep the lights on. You know, it's not necessarily the most important thing to keep funding a certain program right now if no one's there to actually, you know, put that program out into the community. So we are being more responsible, I think is probably the right way to put it in terms of our restrictions. We're also relying, I think, a lot more heavily on organizations to tell us more about where the needs are in Houston. You know, we've got some strategic giving directions that we usually do with education and mental health, but in a time of pandemic, we want to make sure that we're helping the community in areas that we don't even know much about. So it's been really helpful to be able to see where organizations like GHCF and these relief funds are actually giving out their monies, because it gives us a sense of comfort that they've done diligence that we're not capable of doing in this time frame, so we can quickly give gifts out to people who are responsibly, you know, using them for the benefit of the greater community. As for events, I hate events. No offense to anybody else. I think everyone can agree we love the rubber chicken, but we've really appreciated as a family those events that have been able to go virtually, That is no small feat to try to accomplish that. I completely agree that there's been a drop off in terms of donations to those sorts of events, which I find really disappointing. But those organizations that are willing to explain that their event is a pivot to try to support something different than in the past, if there was a luncheon that we went to just to generally support the efforts of an organization, we would much rather, as donors today, hear how attending a virtual event will directly impact the community during the pandemic. If that's the case, we're much more likely to jump on board and join the event.
Kelly, I'm a little nervous for Houston because events play an outsized role in your city relative to other cities. It's a really important consideration, and yeah.
And I'm not sure if they'll all come back. So yeah.
If it's helpful for the group, a few of the folks on our team have put together a assessment checklist for events that can walk you through a process of thinking about the goals around an event. What are you trying to achieve? What is the right platform for putting that forward? It's just a guided conversation for your organization to think through the value of the events, the goals that you're attempting to achieve, and how those goals might be able to be achieved through alternative methods. So if that's something that's an interest to the group, we're happy to pass that along for distribution. And Kelly, I love what you said about thinking about how people are responding to this initiative. I know that we recently had an opportunity to talk with the founder of the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, Lori Bertman. She's actually out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, friend of the firm. And she mentioned that what they're looking for is not necessarily for organizations that are changing their mission, but are finding their role inside of this, and especially thinking about how they are partnering with one another to achieve problems in a new and different way. And one of the things that she talked about was a couple of social service agencies and how one was going to be using the site of another in order to be able to continue out their programming. And so that first organization who was wondering, well, what is my role in this? I don't have one to play, ultimately was able to receive some sustaining funding by thinking creatively about their role in response to this. So really, really important, I think, for everybody to think about their mission and not necessarily transition away from that, but think about what part of their mission touches this type of a response.
All really good points. I'm still thinking about this idea of less restricted, more responsible giving. And I think that was a combination of Kelly and Charlie and some other comments, but it's really good. How are folks thinking about goals, setting or resetting or recalibrating goals and developing adaptive plans and strategies over the next 6 to 12 months? Any thoughts or experiences with that? CCS has ideas about that, but I would love to hear from others. I know we have some, Adam, I'm thinking, I don't know if Baylor is on the line, University of St. Thomas, recently worked with both client partnerships on kind of adaptive strategies that go forward. Anthony, I know you've been working closely with Dawn on some of, and what that looks like, and even having donor outreach and conversations at this time. Any other experiences with that? I know, Matt, you've kind of created these 30, 60, 90-day plans as well, just to make it a bit more granular. Drew is shaking his head. He knows that all too well. I see you, Drew. I see that reaction there.
Yeah, I know this is Anthony with CCS, but I'm spending most of my time focused with the University of St. Thomas. We do have several people from their staff here on the call. Courtney West, Associate Director, I know she's here. Leslie Meggs, Development Coordinator, is here. So if you guys, I'll put you guys on the spot. I know you've been reaching out to folks in your portfolios. What kinds of things have you heard, Courtney?
Thanks, Anthony, for putting me on the spot. No, I mean, I think our approach was kind of following like what a lot of your suggestions were, is more of like an informative approach. So increasing communication with donors, reaching out to check on them, kind of make sure that we continued messaging through multiple channels to let them know what we were doing. So, email, things through mail, and then also through personal connection, either with phone or Zoom calls. So many of our donors have been incredibly generous in stepping up, increasing their giving. We just ended our fiscal year yesterday, so a lot of them gave additional gifts. We reopened a fund that we had done during Hurricane Harvey. It's called Kelp Care, and so really that's kind of emergency assistance for students, because we saw a lot of our students struggling, to finish the semester. And as donors increased their giving at the end of the year, it really helped us give emergency grants and scholarships to students so that they could meet their financial obligations to the university and not have that worry, because they were already having to worry about switching over, to remote and online learning. And a lot of the students that we serve are first generation students, and don't have a lot of the resources that some of us take for granted, especially while we were college students. So this was kind of helping to be an equalizer for those students, and it was really amazing. So we're kind of in the second phase of that. So still working with donors and our board members, we've been challenged to continue to raise funds for that emergency fund as well as our normal goals. But we have several board members who stepped up to give a match and encourage us to continue to push forward. And so far, donors have been receptive. So we hope it continues in that vein.
Hey, Greg, what I've been saying to my clients on this topic is, you just need to be super clear about what your needs are. And in most cases, your needs are going to be greater than they were last year. So the needs are what they are. And then because nobody can do precise planning or projecting, you do have to just put a mark in the sand and say, okay, based on our best estimates, this is what we think we can raise this year. And then begin to shop that around with your board members, your top donors, because you're going to need them to come in. And our experiences and during times of crisis, like in many cases, they want to come in and they want to be that hero in the moment. They want to help you outperform what your conservative projections are so that your mission can be lived more fully to the benefit of more people. So it's that fine balance between what you need and what you think you can raise. And then doing it collaboratively with the donors who need to be there for you. I think it's actually a pretty exciting time to be in philanthropy. People are more accessible. They're interested. I think they're more empathetic. The briefings I've been on with Houston area organizations, there's a lot of questions about the underlying core mission of the organization that has nothing to do with COVID. Like, you just got to be present with them.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea as well to engage board members, of course, to include board members, speaking with transparency, and also rethinking. You're right, Charlie. I mean, the need is going to be the need. It's going to be exacerbated in so many ways. And then what is realistic in terms of fundraising targets for the following year? It would be interesting to hear. I mean, how are others working with their boards at this time? How are you sharing information? How are board members responding? Are they kind of leaning in shoulder to shoulder, so to speak? Are they making commitments or asking others or providing strategic advice and counsel along the way? Any examples of working very successfully with your boards?
I don't know what it's like in Houston, but board attendance, like at board meetings, it's through the roof for a lot of organizations. Obviously, it's all virtual, it's Zoom, but the meetings are happening faster. They get more work done. There's more extraordinary meetings that are set, and people seem to be responding to that. There's a lot of board meetings happening over the summer months, which normally would be unheard of. I would try and take advantage of the technology.
At Baylor College of Medicine, the initial COVID response fund was directed just for the board members. It was a special board campaign. Unrestricted funds, much of that going to vaccine research for Dr. Peter Hotez, who we've all seen on all of the networks. And the board participation rate for that initiative ended up being about 85%. And then also many gifts in kind from the board as well.
So Peter Hotez has been saying what he's been saying for years and years and years, and nobody listens. And now all of a sudden people are listening, and it's going to be Houston who I think delivers a big result. He's such a clear voice for this.
Yeah, it's having him out there and representing has been a great way for Baylor to just reaffirm our mission. So
I think it's a great thing for everybody in Houston. If I would just be talking about the important role that Houston plays generally in the country in all kinds of ways.
This is an interesting observation here too. It would be great to hear what others think about this. And Kelly, not to put you on the spot again, I wouldn't do that. Kelly Hackett. But we have Susan Thompson, and Susan, if you wanted to contextualize or voice your comment or question around, yes, technology is a solution, technology in terms of accessibility, and of course, focus and speed. And how does that relate to donor responses? Is it engendering more responses? Are they faster responses? How is it enabling and empowering basically better philanthropy?
Well, I can speak for my family and just say that, especially during this time, we have been all over the map, literally. So technology has been critical to get all of the trustees on the same page and to allow them to have interaction with the various nonprofits asking for money, because it's just impossible, obviously, to meet in person. So technology's been, I don't know what we would do without it if we weren't able to jump on Zoom calls or conference calls, since no one really wants to look at each other anymore after 3 months. But, I've got my parents are on the East Coast. I'm here. Nonprofits are all over the map. So it's been critical.
It's going to be fun or funny just to go back to phone calls again, right? Every once in a while, there's a moment or a reprieve or relief or whatever, but it's good. No, but it's been a lifesaver for sure in so many different ways. Any other comments or thoughts? We want to be respectful of time. We have another 5 minutes or so. We can help problem solve or resource share. Laura, thank you on the spot sending out our event assessment guide and checklist. Hopefully that's of practical use to everybody. Half my DAF. I think that was started out, Charlie, in California, right? There's a movement to kind of move money off the sidelines, so to speak, and more into action, and to commit it with some speed and urgency.
Yeah, I just find it very compelling. And whether or not your grant is selected to be matched, it's just a rallying cry. It lets you have a serious conversation with hundreds of people, if not thousands of people in Houston about how they can use their donor advised fund to make a difference right now. I find it the equivalent of the Giving Pledge. Mm-hmm. It could become very fashionable in a place like Houston of, yeah, of course I've done half my DAF. I've done it for the symphony, the hospital, my church, my alma mater, local conservation group. Yeah, we've done a lot. I think people, especially in Houston, would get behind that.
Mm-hmm. We have Amelia commenting here as well about the zombie deaths, and is there more giving, or will there be more regulations on them? Thank you for commenting on that, Amelia.
You're welcome. Yes, I have run a community foundation, and I will tell you that I know that there are people that have parked money, and in the past that was acceptable. And I think going forward, that will not be acceptable, where people park money and just leave it there and leave it there and leave it there. I think we will really see that without more giving from those donor advised funds, you are going to see the government step in and put restrictions on. They have been, and not just the commercial ones, but I would say also the community foundations that are doing a great job in really getting that money out. I know, Kelly, your family has some money in some of the donor advised funds at the community foundation. At one point they did. And I know that there's a real push by those organizations, to the community foundations at least, the ones that are really public, to get that money out and to get it to be used within the community for the things that are needed, and stuff like, keeping the lights on, and really making sure that there is enough staff to help run the organizations. Those are important ways for those donor advised funds to really get out and make a difference. So that's what I just want to throw out there. There's a good article last week, I believe, on zombie donor advised funds.
So Amelia, part of it is possibly, or definitely, people parking funds, but some of it is also organizations either needing to or having an opportunity to like approach them differently, ask for larger commitments, like have a more urgent, stronger rationale. Like now's an environment for very big, long-term, structural commitments.
And I would agree, Charlie. And one thing I would say is, in the past, especially with community foundations that I know of, that I work both for the Houston Jewish Community Foundation and the Greater Houston Community Foundation at different times, and they were reticent to let nonprofits reach out to their donors, because the donors set those funds up so that they could have some anonymity. And so there has to be some more discussion with the community foundations, especially the public ones, that they are allowed to reach out. And I know that with the commercial ones, they're not allowed to reach out at all. Nonprofits are not allowed really to reach out at all. At least there's some discussion with nonprofits and the community foundations. I know Great Houston Community Foundation has ways that the nonprofits can put information on their platform, the Houston Great Houston Community Foundation's platform, to let them know what their needs are. And then it's up to the donors in the community foundation to look at those and decide if there's some that they want to support or not. But with the commercial organizations, the Fidelities, and the Vanguards, that is not the case. So I think that needs to change.
Thank you for sharing.
I think that highlights, and I recognize we're virtually out of time here, but an important opportunity for all organizations, and there are a few talking about the challenges of small organizations, to maybe be a little more proactive rather than reactive as it relates to donor advised funds. Try to find out who on your board or what connections you have with people that maybe have donor advised funds, and proactively have conversations with them as their money's already earmarked and ready for charitable distribution, notwithstanding any financial challenges that they might have with the current environment. So it might be an opportunity, even despite the fact that with your existing distributions from donor advised funds that maybe there's some restrictions around that you could go and have a conversation and have it shape and inform your solicitation and cultivation strategies.
That's great. That's the attorney at CCS, the attorney among others, I'm sure, on the phone. But the landmines and gold mines that I think we heard from one of your presentations. But no, of course, Adam has worked with a number of foundations and donor advised funds in particular. And I think that the last thing, just to acknowledge, Melissa, your comment as well, whether it's a new CEO or just the rationale or the confidence to reach out, to increase communication, to lead with empathy, to reaffirm mission and mission impact is great advice. I would just lastly like to thank everybody on behalf of CCS. This has been a great conversation. We look forward to staying in touch. We want to thank Dawn in particular and Melissa in particular and AFP Greater Houston. This has really been terrific this afternoon. So thank you all for your time and participation. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you, everyone, so much.
Stay healthy. Thanks. Thanks, Melissa.
Bye, everybody.